Thank you, Sally, and thanks very much for the introduction and the housekeeping rules. We're really delighted to be able to run this happy hour session. Our sessions are very interactive. We bring in lots of great speakers to share their insights and intelligence and information around a variety of subjects. And this one's in particular with Winckworth Sherwood solicitors, and we're really pleased that Charlotte and the team are here this afternoon. We've had a long-running relationship with Winckworth Sherwood, and during the course of the year, they sponsor 2 or 3 of our happy hour sessions, and I think this is the second one for this year that I can recall, and we look forward to further ones during the remainder of the year. Our sessions are also very much supported by the UKRI, the United Kingdom Research and Innovation Lab, and the Healthy Aging Challenge group in particular. Many of you who are members of the LIN will know that the LIN works closely with the UKRI and the Healthy Aging Challenge to look at different innovative approaches to healthy aging and where housing and the built environment takes place. But this session, which is all about last homes, not for first homes, very much looking at issues in connection with multi-generational housing and planning. And I'm going to invite Charlotte, who's our co-chair this afternoon, to run through the agenda and also to give an overview. So Charlotte, thanks very much for your support, and over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this lovely sunny afternoon. Fingers crossed for no strike action on the IT front today, but hopefully you've got a full house here because you've got nowhere else to go. So on that one, yes, as Jeremy said, we've been working with the HousingLIN for many, many years, great fans of them and great supporters. This session came about from a conversation that Jerry and I were having previously, talking about all things during the pandemic and how focus was on the idea of everybody living together, supporting each other and working within communities. And it struck both of us that those fabulous community ideals are something that many RPs and many of you will have been doing for a long, long time. So we wanted to have a look at what's been done in the past, what you're looking at now, and how various other agencies can help and support in the continued delivery by you of those great multi-generational communities. Last homes, not first homes. First homes, obviously, a big new planning issue. And we've got Alex Walker and Jamie Sullivan here who will be able to talk to some of those points there. They form 2 of my illustrious panel. We're hoping that Marcus Keynes will be able to join us. He has been having some IT issues, but if not, Dahlia from BPHA will be able to give a viewpoint from the RP front. We've also got 2 other fabulous speakers, Natasha Bednault from Leicester City Council and Carol Cairns, who is from Homes England. So without further ado, let me hand over to the first of our speakers. So Natasha, I think you're up first. Over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I will just get my presentation up. So thank you for having me today. I will just get this started. So hello, I'm here from Leicester City Council to talk about an example of an extra care scheme in Leicester, well, 2 schemes, where there's a mixed age model, or an example of how a mixed age model can be done. So for those who don't know, extra care is a model of independent living. People in extra care will have their own tenancy, their own self-contained, in this case, an apartment, and their own front door. So very much, people have their own space. But there's a presence of 24-hour on-site staff to kind of for that reassurance. This can be care staff or housing management staff. And in the case of Abbey and Wolsey, it is that the landlord PA housing have 24-hour on-site staff. In terms, as you can see, what the Wolsey building is here, and Abbey Mill would be around the back. I'm limited on pictures at the moment. One of our value in people assistants is going to go and take some ready for a forthcoming case study. But this is actually in a building that was previously one of Leicester's textile factories. So, really nice use of part of Leicester's heritage. These 2 schemes weren't a mixed age model from the start. So the Wolsey building we can see there is built in 2010 for people aged 55 plus. And Abbey Mill was built adjacently in 2015 for people aged 18 plus. And they're joined by a corridor and share communal spaces like a communal lounge, communal kitchens and craft rooms. So you've got kind of people aged 55 plus in the Wolsey, but a mixture of sort of working age adults and older adults in Abbey Mill, and they can kind of share this the communal lounge. And the apartments in here are all built to be sort of adaptable, completely accessible, things like a walk-in wet room. So, you know, kind of there to make sure that they're meeting lots of different needs in terms of physical access. So the reason that we wanted to do this evaluation is because in Leicester we've got a bit of a different model and a different approach to extra care housing. Traditionally, it's sort of associated more with people who, as being for older adults, it is the traditional model, whereas in our supported living and extra care strategy, we see it as having a role for working age and older adults in being able to kind of be a good home for them. So the role is things like preventing and delaying the need for residential care, and replacing some of our accommodation, our kind of substandard accommodation in the city, with kind of better quality housing where people have a self-contained apartment or space for themselves. So kind of this evaluation was a really good sort of lessons learned for us in terms of that approach, and you know, we've got extra care housing schemes in the pipeline, and we wanted to figure out, you know, what works well with an existing scheme. So the focus of the evaluation was the mixed age community, how this accommodation enables independence, and how it prevents isolation for people with the main focuses. So that's what I'm just going to go through right now, is a bit of an overview of the headlines of what I found out from the evaluation. And just to say, the evaluation involved predominantly it was around talking to people. So we had focus groups with residents and their carers or family members, as well as a survey going out to get people's views on their accommodation. So what was really striking about the community, or the resident community at Abbey Mill and at Wolsey, is that there's a real mix of strength there. You know, it's kind of different people have different levels of sort of independence, and there's a real sense of peer support amongst the resident community. So you've got kind of some people who might struggle with their shopping, but others that are willing to help them. Equally, you might have sort of younger people who don't really have a close family, but they've equally got like kind of living with older people who are there and like a family. So it was a really sort of tight-knit community, and you could tell that kind of variation of different strengths and different needs really complemented people's experience of living there. Overwhelmingly, people said that the mixed stage community was a good thing. There was some kind of people who weren't so keen on it, but I think it mostly stemmed from it being sort of older age to begin with, and then having a mixed age element added in. So it was kind of, people didn't like, so some people found that, well, I chose this accommodation because it was for people aged 55 plus, and now that has changed. And that you could tell from people who've been living there a long time. So that was a big lessons learned in terms of how we configure accommodation in the future. But overwhelmingly, it was kind of a very vibrant community, and people were very proud to be part of it. Another kind of key area we're asking about was the extent to which people feel more independent living in the scheme, and it was kind of focused on sort of things like their daily living needs, and also being able to interact with the community. It was kind of very commonly said that the accessible flats meant that people were kind of always found it easy to do, or easier if they were able to do those personal care tasks to do it independently. The wet rooms meant that people kind of didn't have to, or delayed the need for care, as they were feeling like, no, it makes it completely a lot easier. so that really helped people with their independence. And also the location of this scheme. So this scheme is quite centrally located, close to the Golden Mile in Leicester, which is known for having loads and loads of brilliant South Asian eating establishments. So definitely head there if you want a good curry. But it's also, you know, very central thing. So the accommodation is very close to shops, places of worship, and people just felt that the community was easy to access outside of their accommodation. And most people I spoke to were saying, yeah, I can go independently to the shops, to my place of worship, to the restaurant, and it was kind of you know, something that wasn't a big ordeal for people, is what really came across, and that where am I going? So that was really positive to hear, and kind of shows the location of this accommodation near to sort of facilities, as well as kind of on the inside, configuring the units to make sure that they meet lots of needs is really important. In terms of the preventing of isolation, this was kind of really positive, and what was great about this was I managed to squeeze this evaluation in before COVID, and sort of see people in the scheme, and found that there was a really tight-knit resident community. People said that it felt like it was kind of being part of a big family, and they really took pride in sort of arranging activities, communally cooking for each other in the communal kitchens if they wanted to, for things like birthdays and anniversaries, and that staff really helped with this. Even though they're not care staff, they could, you know, sort of, they were on hand to make sure that residents sort of could take control of what they were doing. So that's kind of the key points from the evaluation, but that will be more detail in the case study. But otherwise, I'll hand over to, I don't believe Marcus is in the chat yet, so I'll hand over to Dahlia.
Thank you very much. Hello everyone, I'm just going to talk and look slightly distracted as I share my screen. Okay, here we go. Hopefully you can see that. Can I get a thumbs up that you can see my... Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so I'm coming to you from BPHA. My name's Dahlia, I'm Head of Retirement Living at BPHA, have been for quite some time now. Coming to you from a different angle slightly, in as much as the fact that we haven't actually developed schemes that are specifically multi-generational, but we are looking at how to integrate community into the way in which our retirement living schemes are run. So just to give you a brief overview and some context, BPHA has been managing housing for older people, a term I absolutely detest, for over 30 years. Our retirement living team currently manages 8 housing without care schemes and 18 housing with care or extra care schemes. And we cover a relatively wide geographical area, so stretching from Trowbridge right down in the southwest through Oxfordshire up to Bury St Edmunds, with the majority of our stock and our schemes being located within the Oxford to Cambridge arc, just to provide a bit of context. What we know and what we've done. So we understand that there's a huge stigma around retirement living, which can sometimes be challenging when we're inviting people to come and have a look at our housing with care, or even our housing without care. So we know that sometimes when there are people who are living within their own homes, within their own communities, the idea of moving into housing that's specifically age-related can be quite off-putting. And one of the reasons is because people don't want to leave their communities. I don't want to go and live with a bunch of other people who are just of the same age group. And we've started to look at how we consider age versus need. What is it that we should be looking at? Are we looking at someone like you've reached a certain age tick, this is where you're slotted into, or should we be considering the whole person, what their needs are, and how the accommodation can meet their needs? In doing that, we've kind of looked at the design of the schemes. Part of that is, as I said, it's not just about multi-generational, meaning living under one roof, but it's also inviting people into our schemes. So trying to design schemes, and certainly our newer schemes, in a way that encourages the community to come in, that encourages family members to be able to come in and have lunch and sit and socialise in the communal spaces as much as in people's individual properties. We recognise that we have some really diverse communities, and what we're seeing is, it's interesting, we talk about multi-generational. Well, actually, if we've got some people living in our schemes who are under the age of 55, and we do, and we've got people who are living in our schemes who are 100, we've already got multiple generations actually living under one roof. And again, I try to move away from this idea that we're just working with a homogenous group. You're older, and so you sit in this group over here. What we've also seen as part of those diverse communities, which are really interesting case studies and actually have worked really, really well, is where we've had parents and adult children who have both chosen to move into one of our schemes. Sometimes it's because of the parent having had responsibility for the adult child due to their particular needs, and it's an opportunity to transition from living together to living side by side, and living within a community that can then go on to support that adult child once the parent is no longer with them. We have also seen an increase in younger people requiring extra care housing. And what you end up with, unfortunately, because of the segregation of age and saying this is just for over 55s, is you see like an individual 25-year-old living in an extra care scheme because that's where the only place that their needs can be met. And then you've got a real, you've got another sort of form of segregation where you've got younger people who don't really fit into the wider community. So as I said, looking at bringing the community in rather than just talking about how people can live side by side in households, but also bringing the community in and inviting them to do things alongside our residents. We've also got experience of building within established communities, and that's been really positive in as much as where we've got an extra care scheme, for example, or a retirement living scheme without care in an already established area, people who maybe lived in their own accommodation, in their own independent homes and general needs, aren't having to move very far from the neighbourhoods that they know, from the community that they know, from the amenities that they know, because there's an extra care scheme located within their community. We all understand the shifting demographic, as I said. Are we really an older person at 55? And there's something around need where we acknowledge that there is a need for us to change the way that we think about age, looking at the whole person, having a more holistic view, and asking them what they need. So we are looking at being an individual and having the independence, but living within a community. Now, whether that's a multi-generational community within a scheme, or a scheme which includes sort of the outside community, or looking at other options. So we also deliver a responder service, emergency responder service. So there are also ways to support people to age where they are, to continue to live where they are, with additional support that can go in to encourage them to remain in maybe a multi-generational household outside of the scheme. There are challenges that come with looking at multi-generational housing, commissioning, the nominations and age-related exclusions that exist around our schemes. We understand that. A shift in mindset. It's still very difficult sometimes for people to imagine the idea of multi-generations living under one roof and being able to meet the needs, because again, we tend to segregate people into those age groups. Community integration, I talk about it. It's not as simple as just saying community integration. There's a lot of work that needs to go into community integration, and we recognise that. That is a challenge, a positive challenge, but a challenge. Safety and security. So we've looked at how we design our schemes, and obviously we want people to feel secure in those schemes. But sometimes when we're talking about inviting people in, it's about how do you balance that with people feeling safe and secure, because quite often when you talk to people who move into schemes, the idea of having the safety and security is part of the draw. The changing needs. So we are an evolving population. The demographic is changing, but needs are changing also, and there is that constant need to understand how those needs need to be met. And then there's costs. We know that building housing with care on site or any housing with large communal spaces is extremely expensive. And those costs are passed on to those who are moving in. So when we're talking about between inverted commas, older generation, maybe where there is more opportunity for them to be able to spend their money how they like. If we're talking about a younger community and putting two age ranges together, or the multi-generations together, what are the implications around cost of building schemes where there might be, or properties where there might be more shared facilities. In terms of BPHA in our future, we're thinking about, as I said, one size does not fit all. We are currently observing the change in demographic and looking at how we can meet the needs. Rebranding away from age. So whilst we appreciate there are very specific things sometimes that are related to aging, we still feel the need to rebrand away from age and recognise people as entire beings and not just bracketed according to when they were born. Customer needs is understanding the customer needs and building schemes that meet customer needs of multiple generations, expanding our service offer to be able to accommodate for those. And also one of our kind of key areas is about the positive customer experience. So not sitting at the drawing board and coming up with what we think is a great plan or what theoretically is a great plan, but also talking to our customers and walking them through it so that we make sure that we deliver things that people want. And that's us, that's me. So I am now passing on to, I've got to unshare, sorry. And I am now passing on to, I can't see my other screen, so I can't tell you. Yes, I can.
Then I just pop on there. Hello, Marcus has now joined us. So Marcus, if you're ready, do you want to be the second of our RP presenters? There we go. Fabulous. Thank you, Dolly and Natasha. And if we hand over to Marcus.
That's great. Thank you, Charlotte, and apologies for the joining problems. So thankfully managed to join via my iPhone in the end. So yeah, if you could drive the slides, that'd be great. Thank you. So good afternoon. My name is Marcus Keynes. I head up the development programme at Longhurst Group, and I was just going to touch on some of the areas within the development programme and across Longhurst Group that we're doing to help residents, whether with a specific care need or an older resident, remain in their home, and also within the new build homes we're developing to allow for future adaptability right from the start. Can I have the next slide, please? So Longhurst Group operates across the Midlands, predominantly in the East Midlands and Cambridgeshire. Around about 10% of our stock is what we class as older person or supported. We have 4 registered care facilities as well. And as well as our own stock, we also manage stock for other RPs, and our development programme of around about 750 homes a year is split across general needs, rent, sale, extra care, and I've included asset maximisation, which is what we're looking to do with our ageing stock that is reaching the end of its design life, particularly the traditional sheltered and Cat 2 stock. Next slide, please. So we launched our corporate plan in 2019, titled Improving Lives 2025, and that was underpinned by 2 pillars. One, how can we improve the lives of our customers in terms of health and well-being, and how can we improve their life around economic resilience. Sitting alongside that, we had a development strategy, but we've refreshed the development strategy last year to ensure a much closer alignment with the corporate plan and improving lives. So our development strategy and how it ties back to improving lives is looking at the design, the functionality and the accessibility of the new homes we build. We are proactively seeking more M42 and M43 homes, particularly on our own land-led and package deal schemes. what can we do with our supply chain in terms of leverage, and that relates to local labour, local spend, and the helping the economic resilience of our customers. We've moved to assess all of our new build schemes against the Building for Life 12 assessment criteria, and we target a minimum of 9 out of 12 across the design, integration and connectivity on all of our new build developments. We are beginning to get much smarter and cleverer at customer feedback, and including customer feedback both on the units that we've developed, how they function, do the layouts work, but also on the design and layout of schemes themselves, so that we can continually enhance our new build programme. We have set some minimum space standards against the national space standards, and we report on that, and around about 70% of all of our new developments are now achieving 100% NDSS. And on larger schemes, particularly developments over 50 units, we're actively seeking larger, more accessible homes, including an increased provision of M42 and M43. And I was just going to move to a couple of specific examples, just to give you a flavour of what we are doing. So come for the next slide, please. This was a development just outside Peterborough, 67 homes for rent to home by shared ownership and outright sale, completely tenure blind development. But because we were able to have really early dialogue with the local authority, Peterborough City Council, we were able to include 2 fully wheelchair accessible homes within the development. And on one of those, we knew who the tenant was going to be right from the start. So we were even able to adapt that home to suit their own specific needs and put a through floor lift in the property. Because we had homes for rent and sale and shared ownership on the scheme, we wanted to demonstrate how simple areas of adaptability can be included. So we worked with a company called Invisible Creations, which spun out of the National Housing Federation. And what you can see in the images there are predominantly grab rails, but we fitted them to all the properties. So you've got grab rails disguised as a plant holder by the front and rear doors. You've got toilet roll holders, shower tidies. They also do mirrors, and a shower riser that also doubles as a grab rail. And we included those across all the developments. So simple measures, which again do not require future adaptability for simple improvements to accessibility. Can I have the next slide, please? So this slide is a much bigger development of 400 homes, split pretty much 50-50 retirement and general needs. And then we have sold one phase on to a care provider to provide a fully integrated care and general needs family accommodation scheme. Split across 10 phases. It has taken a lot longer than we originally thought to develop. But basically, as we sit here today, we have developed 135 family homes. We've built the first 61 retirement units, which were a mix of apartments and bungalows, and the retirement hub. The care home facility has started on site, and then we are about, or we're working with our preferred contractor on starting on the final phases. But the photos demonstrate a complete mix of, as I say, of general needs and retirement, and they are split or phased across the development. So right from the start, we wanted to integrate general needs and retirement. Can I have my final slide, please? So I suppose, what have we learned as an organisation in terms of helping to improve accessibility? Certainly early dialogue with a local authority. If you can have early dialogue, it really helps in terms of understanding who potential nominees will be, particularly for the social and affordable rent. We've also done the hold shared ownership program, and we had shared ownership units at our Humberston development, the one you've just seen. By having an early dialogue with the local authority, as I say, we can identify who the customer is going to be. We can also look to include a local lettings policy to ensure a mix of residents on developments. Where we're looking to improve accessibility across all of our schemes, including simple items such as invisible creations. We've also mandated that unless it was in a flood zone, all of our homes will have level access from the front and rear. We have signed up to a program called Harry's Pledge, which is all about improving accessibility of new homes, not just for the customer themselves, but also for carers as well. As I say, we are listening much more to our customers around layouts of houses. How can we improve design, increase space standards, and scheme layouts as well. And the final point is that new build is relatively easy to an extent, but we are now starting to look at what can we do to future-proof and adapt for mixed living our existing stock. So where we have got, to say, sort of the former Cat 2 sheltered schemes, we've got some care facilities that are on the ground floor with general needs properties above sharing the same entrance, which haven't been compatible. We've had a couple of facilities where care has shared the facility with former young offenders, and we house both, but it's just been problems housing the same in a single development. So we're beginning to tackle those problems. Is our sort of our next challenge. And that's all I was going to say as a starter for 10, Charlotte. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Marcus. It's really, really interesting to hear some of the RP and the sort of the provision aspects of multi-generational communities and mixed communities there. Ideal point, I think, now if we can bring Jamie and our planning side in. So Jamie Sullivan from ICNI, how planning reforms will impact, and a practitioner's perspective, if I can hand over to you.
That's right. Thanks very much, Charlotte, and thanks very much to the speakers as well. Just checking you can see everything on there. Slides coming up, is it? Hear me okay? Good stuff. Yes, so some really informative presentations up first there, and I'm going to try and sort of dovetail with those the best that I can, really. But obviously, I'm talking about some much higher level national planning reforms here, and so I think it's important to start up by saying, you know, there are different definitions of what multi-generational living here is. So, and we heard a lot of them just then from the different speakers. Now, I'll just try and plug into where I think those are important, because obviously there are different definitions, and that will affect the way in which we look at these reforms themselves. But what I'm basically going to do is talk about the reforms and say whether it's harder or easier to deliver some of those types of development that we just heard about. Now, as ever, when you're talking about planning reforms, there's always some very big caveats, and that's very much the case here. So first of all, I've got to set my stall out and say, look, there's a lot of speculation in this presentation. Third age living, retirement housing, extra care, accessibility, accessible housing, whatever you want to call it, however you term multi-generational living. It's not mentioned once in the reforms that have been announced so far. Now, that's mostly because all that we've seen so far is the really kind of high level architecture of the legislation. The detail, which might mention those specific terms, is still very patchy. So what I'm trying to do for you today is kind of piece together a bit of a picture for you based on what I think will happen or what could happen. Others will undoubtedly have their own differing views on this. The other big caveat is that I'm not covering everything off here now. First of all, that's because this is part of a bit of a double act with myself and Alex from Winckworth Sherwood. He's covering off through the really big reforms, particularly around finance and infrastructure levy and how all that's going to work, and primacy of the development plan, which is really interesting in itself and needs its own kind of segment to breathe. But second, there's so much in these reforms. There's a huge breadth of coverage on them that I'm just going to look at some of the key ones that I think will affect this. It's not to say that there won't be other things in those reforms that aren't of interest, but those 4 that I'm going to run through today will be design codes, national development management policies, streamlined local plans, and 5-year housing land supplies. Now, if you're looking at your screen and you're thinking, I can't remember what happened in the first series of this TV show with the last set of planning reforms, don't worry. We do have a previously on planning reforms section, which I'm going to run through for you now. And this is a kind of a how do we get here in terms of planning reforms? So you might remember last summer, our last Secretary of State, Robert Jenrick there, I completely forgotten what he looked like until I had to search for his picture again. That's how quickly we go through Secretary of States, isn't it? But those reforms that he announced last summer, there was a real aim in there in terms of increasing house building in the southeast. It was all about speed and efficiency of decisions and getting the country moving again. But we've moved to a much more kind of protective or an authoritarian approach. And I don't know if anyone saw Michael Gove's article in the Daily Mail a few months ago, where he talked about how he's going to take on developers. So how did this happen? Well, one of the main issues was when that white paper first came out, as often happens when people in government try to do something fairly far-reaching with planning reforms, there's a huge uproar in the press about this being a bit of a developer's charter, which I thought for the most part was relatively unfair. But what this did do was really wind up the Conservative heartlands and was really seized upon by all of the other political parties. And when you've got, the Labour Party, almost acting in a sort of a NIMBY fashion, as we saw from this bottom left advert that they put out there, you know that people are seeing a lot of capital in terms of opposing planning reforms. So the key moment then really was what happened in Chesham and Amersham in the by-election, where the Tories had a 16,000 seat majority and lost to the Lib Dems by 8,000. Now, the narrative was that was all about the planning reforms that were put forward. Whether or not that's fully correct is by the by. That is what is being seen as the issue. So Gove was brought in, Jenrick shuffled around, and Gove's come in to sort out what's seen as a bit of a mess with the planning reforms, and we're no longer talking about this big system reboot that Boris Johnson put his name to, but more altering of the system in a fairly fundamental way, but altering the existing system. So I'm going to have a look through some of those key reforms. So the little recap on each of these, just in case you've forgotten or haven't read the paper. Don't worry, you don't need to have done that beforehand. I'll try and summarize it best I can. So one of the main reforms is that there needs to be, alongside every local plan, a mandatory district-wide design code for development in the borough that new development will need to accord with as best it can. Beneath that, there is optional, more localized design codes. Those could be area or site-based, and they could be produced by local authorities, you'd expect in the most part, but could also be neighbourhood groups or developers bringing those forward. And they will need to accord with national policy. And as many people would know at the moment, there's a big imperative about delivering beauty as part of design. So essentially, those design codes are going to have to seek to deliver on that beauty agenda, and also at the same time accommodate the local voice of residents, which is also a requirement of these new design codes as the policy reforms are currently drafted. Now, let's put aside how local authorities might resource that, and I know that's a big one to put to the side. Let's just assume we live in a perfect world and they can. What does this mean for multi-generational communities? Well, for those really large communities, I would question new communities where you maybe have an extra care scheme within a new kind of urban extension. I would question whether a design code can accommodate that, because quite often you are looking at an extra care scheme, say, for example, to be a much more high density development than the housing that might surround it. Likewise, anything site specific. Is it going to be able to accommodate and have sufficient flexibility to deliver something that might be higher density or of a different form that wasn't initially expected? I think the issue is with a lot of these design codes that we could be in an area where people who write them are just thinking about housing, general needs housing, and not thinking about the other forms of development. Now, that's not the end of the world, but I can tell you I've worked on a scheme where there was a design code and did the reserve matters application, and it wasn't, and we didn't write the design code, and that in itself was difficult. So absolutely key will be to get involved in drafting of these design codes. And I'd also add, going back to the kind of accessible homes point and accessibility more generally, is there an opportunity for design codes to influence them to ensure that those accessibility requirements for people who have mobility problems is kind of built into things like the way in which street furniture and streets are designed as well. Secondly, then, local plan focus. In short, the government still wants to see these local plans produced in 30 months rather than the 3 to 30 years, which they have taken in some instances and counting and in certain local authorities. And that will really mean a kind of a plug-in and play approach to housing numbers. I can't see how they can get around that. Now, my concern is we're supposed to be getting an announcement on where we go with housing numbers, and of course, extra care and care homes contribute to those housing numbers, as do other forms of older persons housing. But the issue is we have a government at the moment that is limping by, hoping to keep its backbenchers happy. And one way they could do that is go quite low in terms of housing numbers, and then that's kind of baked into this system. And then the issue with that is that however positive the rest of the policies that I might talk about are, would there be enough sites coming forward to deliver multi-generational development? And the price of land starts spiraling up because there's not enough of these sites coming forward, and that makes it harder to deliver schemes that have a multi-generational element to it. So putting that point to one side, then local plans, the idea at least is that they will focus more on allocations themselves. And in theory, I think there's a good chance here, if that really does happen, again, that perfect world scenario, that there's more of a chance then to look at the different types of uses that occur on that allocation, rather than just this laser focus that we have at the moment in local plans quite often of just looking at general market housing and just avoiding any problems around that and making sure that's all satisfied. So there might be the chance for some more lateral thinking, but a lot of the ability to throw out that headroom will be reliant on other policies, such as the national development management policies. Now, I'm going to try not to step on Alex's toes too much here with the subsequent presentation, but the idea is essentially you have a new set of national development management policies. So rather than having a local plan that's just got hundreds and hundreds of pages within it, lots of that repeating quite a lot of national policy, you can really streamline it down and you have one separate document with all of the national policies. That's the plan from government anyway. So I think this is quite sensible in a lot of ways. Things like heritage, ecology, flood risk. Do we need local policies as well as national ones? I would suggest probably not. You're still going to need localized policies for a lot of things. You know, the most obvious example being things like parking standards. You can possibly nationalize those. But between those, there's a huge grey area, and I think that's where the success of this will work. Is can that be successfully defined in terms of where you localize and where you nationalize policies? But moving on to how this might help the sector in delivering multi-generational living, could we have a policy purely in those national policies that was supportive about the principle of increasing the choice of older persons care and accommodation and multi-generational communities in principle in those national policies? Now, as a starting point, that would be very beneficial. It would have to be quite generic in a way, but it would be something that would be very difficult to ignore in the way that things that are currently in national plan and practice guidance are easier to ignore. And I will leave that little hook there for Alex to pick up on in his presentation. So one of the other things, I think, thinking about accessible dwellings that we might see, if the government was so minded, just to give you an idea of the scope of what this could cover, you could see things like internal space standards and a policy on accessible dwellings being applied within those national policies if government felt that that needed to be taken away from local authorities. Now, I'm not suggesting that that is going to be at the forefront of government at the moment, but with some successful lobbying, it could be, although I fully accept that there is certainly no consensus view on doing that at the moment. But just to give you a flavour of quite how powerful those national policies can be, and Secretary of State can bring in, take out, amend those policies as they see fit, and with the level of consultation that they think is required as well. So final policy I wanted to talk about then was 5-year housing land supply, which is not something we often talk about really in the sector, to be perfectly honest. But for those of you who aren't familiar with this as a concept, basically, if a local authority is demonstrated to not have enough planning permissions to meet its housing need, then unallocated sites outside of the development boundary can be considered for housing. Now, what the government is suggesting is that there is immunity from this for local authorities for 5 years if they have a local plan adopted. Now, streamline a very complex situation, and let's just focus on what this might mean for the sector. This immunity wouldn't extend to third age living development because the level of need is measured in a different way. So whereas at the moment you have developers who may have missed out on a local plan application sitting around waiting for this 5-year housing land supply window to open up to try and exploit, which is what they do for the most part, they might turn around and say, well, look, we're not going to wait those five years for that window to open up, and we might not get allocated in the next local plan cycle. Why don't we bring forward a third age living scheme? And that would be quite similar to the opportunity that opened up with Greenbelt sites with the famous Westmoreland retirement villages appeal decision, which basically said, lack of need and absence of available sites is a form of very special circumstances. And I think that will commonly happen if local authorities and local plans are not addressing the needs for different forms of care and accommodation for older people within their local plans. So just to summarise then, what should we be doing as a sector? These are very far-reaching forms, and we have a number of levers here to kind of positively improve the landscape in which multi-generational communities are delivered. And so there's 3 things I'd say here. 1, try and get involved in those national consultations when they commence in the next year. Let's look to seek to positively have national policies for third age living developments apply across England in a way that works. Let's look to get involved in influencing local design codes when local authorities or other groups start producing them, so they've got those flexibility to deliver different types of multi-generational facilities or the level of accessibility that's required for different groups within our society. And let's look to get involved in that consultation in local plans to make sure they have that mix of uses for multi-generational communities that meets the needs for everyone in our society. So that's it from me. I think I'm passing over to Alex now. If you're ready, I'll stop sharing.
Lovely, thank you, Jamie. I'll pick up screen sharing on my.
Good stuff. I hope I haven't set you up too much with that little hook.
Not at all, not at all. Nicely done. So hopefully everyone can now see that screen share that I've got of my slide. Shout if not. So Jamie's kind of covered the practitioner's perspective. And I'm going to be picking up the legal perspective as to how delivery might actually be coming forwards. The big focus of what I'm going to be talking about is the Levering Up and Regeneration Bill. That will probably be a surprise to absolutely no one. Planning lawyer talking about planning reforms, what's a surprise there? There's quite a lot to get through in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. And it's not just the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, it's the raft of documents that have been published by the government in association with that bill. Now, obviously, the bill is making its way through the various houses and committee stages at the moment. So we are going to see amendments. There have already been various amendments tabled by members, and we're no doubt going to see more at committee stage. So it's going to be a bit of a moving feast, and there's a lot that is TBC still within the bill itself. The government has taken the view, seemingly in drafting the bill, that it's easiest to try and fix an awful lot to come forward by regs in due course, rather than trying to specify too much at this stage. That's one of the key things that we're going to be seeing in terms of the two big topics that I'm going to be covering off, which is both Section 38.6 and how that interacts with the National Development Management Policies that Jamie outlined. A good shorthand, I think, although this is subject to a few nuances, is that effectively I think the core document that's going to contain those National Development Management Policies is going to end up being the NPPF. And I think the revised form of the NPPF, National Planning Policy Framework, is very much going to be the document which records most, if not all, of those National Development Management Policies. Now, there's nuance to that insofar as the way that the bill is currently drafted, it's effectively at the Secretary of State's discretion what they want to direct amounts to National Development Management Policies. So it gives a lot of reserved discretion to the Secretary of State in terms of what National Development Management Policies actually look like, and not a huge amount of scope for necessary consultation being prescribed by the bill. The other thing is the infrastructure levy. Now, one of the big schedules to the bill as it currently stands deals with the infrastructure levy, and the infrastructure levy is supposedly going to be a more nationally standardised system, much as we're seeing with National Development Management Policies, a nationally standardised system of effectively successor surcharging. So the community infrastructure levy, which many, if not all of you, may be at least passingly familiar with, and those of you who are more familiar with it may be decrying that. It's possibly everyone in planning's least favourite topic. That seems to be a system that they're trying to standardise, although, as I'll touch on later, they seem to at least recognise that it's not going to be a wholesale replacement. There's still going to be scope for some overlap, at least in the short to medium term. So, turning to the first of the matters that we need to grapple with, the national policy-led system that we now see in the revised Section 38.6. So, I'm sure that most of you are familiar with what Section 38.6 does. It is basically the fundamental litmus test that gets applied in planning, which is the core test as to effectively whether planning permission ought to be granted in terms of how a planning authority is going to determine applications put before it. Previously, it had been that you would make a determination with regard to the development plan, and in accordance therewith, unless material considerations indicated otherwise. That's now being changed a bit. There's a couple of things which are changing there. First, the insertion of these national development management policies are now being crystallised within the Section 38.6 test. That might seem a fairly dry point, but it's actually entirely fundamental, because it effectively gives the same primacy that you normally see reserved for the local plan in relation to these national development management policies. So at a stroke, the National Planning Policy Framework has gone from a policy document that you have to have, regard to as a material consideration in the overall planning balance, to now being given the same weight as one would give an up-to-date local plan. So that really has a huge impact. And then similarly, they've slightly weakened the impact of material considerations by tweaking it to requiring that they strongly indicate otherwise, which is a term that I think we'll see some litigation on, because strongly, it's not a particularly precise term. But the key thing to take away is, as Jamie's outlined, these new development management policies that are going to be prescribed nationally are going to be really very significant indeed. in the anticipation that the NPPF is going to be the document codifying a lot of those, we are due a prospectus of that relatively quickly. I'm not sure precisely when that's going to be. I think Michael Gove spoke in the House recently when he was accorded in Hansard, saying that was going to be coming out in the next few weeks, the revised NPPF itself. Instead, it's just going to be the prospectus, so i.e. a headline summary of what that document is going to contain. But I think we can expect a consultation on that. And I think it's going to be really important, just as we need to engage with a whole raft of other things that are going on, for that to be looked at in quite a lot of detail in terms of the consultation that will be undertaken on that. Because, as I've said, the extent of consultation that's safeguarded by the bill in relation to these policies is scant to none. And I think, given the huge impact that these policies could have in terms of enabling and simplifying delivery of, multi-generational housing or retirement living or whatever we want to call any particular product, it's going to have a huge impact. So it really is going to be something that will have a lot of significance going forwards. And I think the sooner that the industry can engage with it, the better, to ensure that, nobody's left behind. Now, it does obviously give a good opportunity as well to help to promote and enable these sorts of schemes. We've already seen that it's probably likely that this is going to be a mechanism by which First Homes is robustly defended by the government. I would be very surprised if there wasn't some sort of provision within these prescribed national development management policies which guarantees First Homes, and I think that gives an in for it also, governing later living and mixed living. But in order to make sure that there is as good an opportunity as possible, I think engagement is the really key thing here. So moving on from those national development management policies, we've also then got the infrastructure levy reforms. I think there's been a lot of discussion about how planning gain works, about how land value capture can be reformed by the government. I think there was an anticipation that the infrastructure levy was going to be potentially a wholesale replacement for both Section 106 and SIL mechanisms that we are, for better or worse, very familiar with. But it seems as though that's probably not going to be the case. There is a safeguarded position for SIL to certainly linger on, and that's going to be the case within London, because at the moment SIL is funding Crossrail 2. So certainly in London we're going to be living with potentially a tripartite system of 106, SIL and infrastructure levy, which will be interesting to see how that works. And we're also still going to see 106 retained for more complicated, larger sites in order to help safeguard certain things, including most likely affordable housing. And I'll touch base on that shortly, but we are still scant on the details. A lot of it is to come forward in regulations which we've not yet had sight of. That is four square with what they did on SIL. A very general set of powers was introduced in the Planning Act, and it took a couple of years for the regulations to come forward. So I wouldn't be surprised if we ended up in a similar place where there's a certain level of uncertainty in relation to affordable housing. One thing that is really important is that with infrastructure levy, it's a must rather than a may. So local authorities will be expected to have an infrastructure levy and will be required, if the bill comes forward in its current status, to have an infrastructure levy in place. Now, infrastructure levy, unlike community infrastructure levy, is saying that affordable housing is going to be a sort of infrastructure to be delivered by the infrastructure levy. It's noteworthy that SIL previously excluded affordable housing, and it was all to be governed by 106. But if the intention is that the bill remains as is, it seems that delivery of affordable housing on site will effectively be an in-kind provision and payment of your infrastructure levy. What we will then see is that there will effectively be a mechanism through infrastructure levy which governs how much affordable housing needs to be provided on site, potentially, in order to obtain any discount. But if it's not being provided on site, there's then a question mark over how that then gets delivered, because if it's effectively going into a large pot whereby the local authority is then provided with funding in order to deliver affordable housing. It's going to be interesting to see how that then gets turned into delivery on the ground. So there's a whole raft of questions that are arising from the way that this is currently been drafted in terms of how it's actually going to enable delivery of general needs affordable housing, but also, you know, affordable housing in the extra care, multi-generational living, etc. sectors. Now, I suspect what we might see is a 106 mechanism whereby it stays in place for larger, more complex schemes, and it still secures on-site affordable. I think what we're likely to see is that 106 will stay in place in terms of securing certain things that it's going to be quite difficult to adequately govern by way of condition, and the infrastructure levy, being effectively a tax on development, is simply not going to be able to govern. So things like marketing and lettings procedures and nominations rights, etc., particularly where you have a product that is perhaps targeted at particular age groups, even if it's part of a broader multi-generational development, you may well have a system whereby the 106 remains in place, albeit you have this tripartite or bipart system whereby infrastructure levy and 106 is governed. But I think one of the key things that we're going to have to watch out for as an industry is really how the government brings forward how infrastructure levy and 106 are going to work together to ensure that affordable housing generally, and as I say, across different particular sectors, is going to continue to deliver and not be disrupted. Because I think, you know, a lot of us will be familiar with the disruption that's caused by things like SIL. And I think particularly if the intention is that, you know, affordable housing starts to be funded effectively by a development tax in the first instance, that is going to lead to a whole raft of questions as to how it's going to operate, what's counted as affordable housing that can be counted in lieu against your infrastructure levy liabilities. There's going to be a whole load of questions that we're going to have to very carefully scrutinise in relation to how this comes forwards. And therefore, it's going to be really important to engage with these proposals as they come forwards, to make sure that as the government drafts up the regulations, that it is keeping pace with what we need in order to enable delivery to come forwards. So that's a very quick headline summary of where we are on a couple of the key provisions on the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. What I would say is that it's a complicated bill. There's a lot of parts to it. So that is merely beginning to scratch the surface. So it is worth a look, it is worth reading into, but yeah, I wouldn't try and do it all in one day because there's just so much of the thing. So on that note, I think I will hand over to, who's next? Is it Carol who's next?
Carol's up next. So our final speaker. So just whilst we're handing over, there's lots of questions going into the Q&A box. If anybody's got anything else that they'd like to flag in there, please drop a line. I've got some questions I'd like to ask afterwards, but I will hand over to Carol to wrap us up from the speakers.
Thank you. I'm hoping that I am sharing my screen now. Can everybody see that?
Yeah, that's perfect, Carol. Thank you.
Okay, I know it's a little bit slow with my broadband, so hopefully it will keep up. Okay, so thank you for inviting me along, and good afternoon, everybody. Just in case you've forgotten who I am, I'm Carol Keynes. I'm head of affordable housing growth in Homes England, and as the title it says, that my role's focused on growing our affordable housing programme and delivering our affordable housing grant programmes, and that means we're at that sort of front end of that process of affordable housing delivery, working with local authorities, working with providers to support that sort of delivery of affordable housing where it's most needed. My particular geographical focus is on the east and southeast of England, but I do have colleagues who cover other areas of the country. But just to be clear, we cover England, all areas sort of outside of London. London has its own programme. And I'll give you contact details a little bit later on of colleagues at the end of this presentation. So I'm going to just give a little bit of an update on the sort of funding and support that we can provide. It's a bit general, but independent living is included in there. So I will just hopefully in a few minutes whip through some of the sort of key points. I'm trying to move on to the next slide. It is being very slow. There we go. So I don't think I could get away with, especially after the last two presentations, without mentioning the Levelling Up paper. I mean, but just to be really clear, Homes England doesn't make policy. We manage those initiatives that deliver government policy. So, you know, listening very intently to everything that's gone before, I'm not going to be able to sort of add anything or speculate on that, obviously. But one thing I just pulled out of the paper here is that sort of mention of this task force in the white paper that would be looking at providing that sort of better choice, quality and security of housing for older people. It's obviously good to see this commitment from government, but as in the same sort of manner as Alex and Jamie has said, there's no sort of detail on that yet. So nothing to report right now, but hopefully more information will emerge as that moves forward. But just in terms of levelling up generally, I mean, what does it mean for Homes England? We haven't got all of that detail yet. There's still an awful lot being sort of worked through. But one of the things we're sort of relatively clear about is that we're going to have to sort of focus an awful lot on place. It's less about our programmes, much more about working holistically across all of the stuff we do in Homes England, and focusing on the needs of place, how we can sort of work with stakeholders, with partners to deliver those local ambitions. So no doubt we will see changes within the agency in terms of how we work, but for now, and in terms, certainly in terms of the affordable homes delivery, we are sort of carrying on with our existing programme. The slides come up an awful lot quicker. So, I mean, just because the Levelling Up paper is there, there's lots of sort of things to work through. It doesn't mean that we're sort of sitting on our hands and doing nothing. Homes England are really in a privileged position, I think, in having received that commitment to funding for an affordable homes programme already. So with 7.4, nearly 7.4 billion to deliver 130,000 homes across England by 2026. As I said, London's got its own programme, but this commitment was made back in 2020 as part of government's plans to tackle the housing crisis and homelessness and to help people onto the housing ladder. And it is only part of the Homes England offer, but as I said earlier, our place focus is going to be looking at how we combine the various sort of funding and support that we've got that can best fit then and support local needs. So when the programme, the Affordable Homes Programme, launched in 2021, eligibility broadened out to include a range of different types of organisations who need that capital grant to deliver the tenures that are supported by the programme. And I haven't got time today to go into lots of detail. There's information on our website, but in a nutshell, that's social rent, affordable rent, shared ownership, rent to buy, and also includes OPSO and hold. So 7.4 billion, great news, meant we can crack on. And one of the things we did very soon after the launch was to go out to a competitive bidding process for what we call strategic partners. And you may be aware that we have allocated almost 5.4 billion of this fund to our strategic partners through that process. And what is a strategic partner? A strategic partner basically submitted bids to us setting out what they intend to deliver, what tenures, where they would be, just broadly by government office region, with an agreed sort of grant ask to cover delivery over the next 5 years. So it's much more of a sort of grown up, more flexible relationship with providers to say, you said you can do this, you can deliver this in these places, in a sort of, you know, without necessarily a complete list of schemes, but this is what you said you can deliver. Let's work with us to go ahead now and deliver it. We've made that commitment to them. So, you know, in terms of where you're sitting today, there's a real opportunity here to work with these strategic partners You know, they're less than a year into the programme now. They're building up their programme pipeline. They're building up those schemes that they're going to deliver. So it's a really, really good time to be talking to them. The remaining funds in the programme will be used for individual scheme proposals from anybody who's not a HousingLIN strategic partner. And we call this continuous market engagement, or CME for short, because it's a continuous bidding process with no fixed deadlines. We basically will receive bids for grant funding, and we will sort of determine them on an ongoing basis until that sort of final delivery date of March 26, or until all the funds have been allocated. So let's move on to the next slide. Why am I telling you about the AHP? And that's because it also includes grant funding for supported housing. In the past, we had lots and lots of little programs, really difficult to navigate your way around them. But now we've wrapped up the supported housing funding in the Affordable Homes programme with that commitment for delivering up to 10% as supported housing. So there is a sort of a target for us there. It means we need to really sort of focus on that and work closely with the sector. So what do we mean by supported housing? It's shown here on the slide, but basically housing that includes or provides access to care, support or supervision, which helps people live independently. And this includes housing for older people, disabled and vulnerable people. There's a very, very broad range. We would ask, you know, sometimes you kind of look at our system and you have to put things in boxes. We do ask, you know, what is the designation for what sort of particular group of people is this aimed at? That doesn't mean that we're not sort of supporting, you know, sort of multi-generation, mixed kind of tenures and mixed sort of schemes. We clearly do support that. And what I would sort of really welcome is discussions about the kind, I mean, we've heard some great stuff today about the different types of accommodation, what works for you, you know, for your client groups, and how we can perhaps try and help support that through the programme. I appreciate that support services will vary. As I said, the key focus here is that sort of independent living, helping people live independently for as long as possible in their own homes. So we're not prescriptive about what those support services will be or who provides them. But what we do want, and this is a thing I know that people will say, there is no revenue funding in the programme, it's capital funding. But what we do want is that assurance that that revenue side, where there is a sort of support element, that revenue side is covered, that you've identified funding for that. So it does underline that importance of a kind of a joined up approach at that local delivery level. We're really happy to be part of those conversations. We're really happy to sort of work with you, work through ideas. We don't have to wait until something's on the system and you've, you know, spelled out all the sort of details in a sort of online system. Just have a chat with us about it. So I did say that, you know, in terms of as an agency, we're focused on place. I mean, having that from the sort of levelling up sort of white paper is nothing. It's not particularly. We have got to focus on place. You know, there is this sort of, well, where are these key places we would be working? I think we've just got to be really clear that there's a focus on place anyway, because this programme is trying to deliver what is needed, in particular sort of local authority areas, delivering that sort of local need. You know, so we're interested to know what is it delivering? Where's the evidence base for that? Is there a local strategy? Is it supported by the local authority? Is there a demonstrable demand for this scheme, this product? What sort of social impact and value is it providing? So that context is really important to us because that's sort of underpinning everything that we do. So it sounds a bit cliched, but essentially it is about delivering the right home in the right place but it's providing that choice, it's providing quality and sustainable homes, and we're really, really focused on that as well. We will sort of ask you, what have you built in terms of those sort of sustainability standards, the quality, because there's a real focus on that. You're probably aware as well, and I've said it's only one fund, but there is another fund, is the Department for Health and Social Care, Care and Support Specialised Housing Fund. This is something that's been around for a while. It's been managed by Homes England, and again, it provides capital grant for developing affordable homes, but focused on meeting the needs of older people and people with disabilities. Now, the previous funding programme was extended to 2022 simply because of that impact that the COVID pandemic had on delivery. Just to be aware, there are some ongoing discussions at the moment about a new round of funding for the next 3 years. I don't have any details on that yet. It is sort of being worked through, but what we're really interested to know is that sort of appetite for delivery, the sort of opportunities that are out there. So if you do have schemes that could potentially benefit from the DHSC fund or from our affordable housing fund, don't worry about which fund it is at the moment. I think the idea is to just speak to us and we can kind of work that out. If this is, you know, if this does come to fruition, then if we know you're interested, then we can let you know about it. So basically, I think it is at the moment just a bit of watch this space for any sort of future announcements, but do please speak to us. So in terms of what we're looking for, what we're trying to do is maximise the impact of the funding that we've got. We want to work with that diverse range of partners to meet those diverse needs. At the end of the day, they're your projects, they're your schemes. So how can we support you deliver them? What are those opportunities that are out there? What are the ambitions? We've heard a lot about challenges. What are they? Can our resources help? Can't say they always will, but in a lot of cases, we've got lots of case studies of stuff we have supported. So, and we've got a 10% target. So we are really, really keen to speak to you. Can we help with collaboration or relationship building? And all we're really looking for is that, you know, commitment to the quality schemes, which I know you all want. We are encouraging across our whole programme use of MMC, use of SME contractors, but they're not essential. It's not an absolute. I know it's not one size fits all. So we do want to see that context as well, as I've already mentioned, of how any support we would give for a scheme would help address that local need and deliver that social value. So there are some, I've just popped them up here, I don't need to go through them all, but just the sort of questions that, you know, could act as sort of prompts when you're thinking about talking to us about a scheme. You know, the normal things I'm sure you'll be looking at anyway. As always though, we've got to, you know, it's public money at the end of the day, we've got to ensure that value to the public purse. So when we're looking at schemes, yes, we will be looking at the costs. I mean, we have to. We will be looking at grant minimisation, like what's the least amount of grant needed to make the scheme happen. But don't get fixated about grant rates, that we don't have a specific grant rate. Yes, we benchmark. We've got to sort of look across the field and say, well, you know, comparing sort of apples with apples, as it were, and looking at some sort of scale of where we are according to those benchmarks, but every scheme's different. So, you know, there's no such thing as a sort of a daft question. Just come to us and let us know, you know, what you want to talk about and any possibilities for us to support. And, you know, even before submitting a bid, we'll have that conversation with you. So I think I said I would let you know that that's the sort of how, I mean, again, contact any one of us. That's just how we're sort of split in terms of how we manage our teams across the agency. But there's the assistant director there, Dilys Jones, you may know, and then there are 4 of us heads across the regions. When this slide deck is shared, there are a number of case studies as well. and I don't have time to sort of go through them, so I've popped them in there just to give an idea of the sort of range of things that have been supported either through the AHP. Most of them will be the last programme. We're only a year into this programme, so obviously not an awful lot sort of coming out the other end yet, but we have allocated, you know, we are on target with that sort of 10%, so we are getting a lot of interest for these sort of schemes. So yeah, I think that's me. Happy to answer questions when it comes, and we're going into the Q&A session now, so handing back to Charlotte, I think.
Yes, lovely. Thank you very much. Well, firstly, thank you to each of our speakers. Absolutely fascinating. Really, really enjoyed that. And hopefully all of you listening at home or walking around the park or wherever you're doing it have found that equally interesting. For me, a couple of things that I saw coming out, lots to talk about holistic thinking in all of this, coupled with a desire from all different angles for people to get involved and engaged, and to respond to the calls from either local government, central government, or the various government quangos. My first question, I think, this is probably for our RP speakers and for Natasha, is what were your drivers for delivery of multi-generational schemes? And related to that, how did you look to engage with those that you were hoping to house through the same? Natasha, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so kind of, I guess kind of we kind of, there's a driver in that, you know, extra, it's particularly around the role of extra care housing in our strategy, is that, you know, it's a model where we're looking to have more working age adults with care and support needs in self-contained units, and we see extra care as a really good way of doing that, giving quality accommodation to people with care and support needs. So kind of that's sort of driving us towards having extra care as the model for meeting those needs. And then also kind of it's also a popular model for older age adults, and kind of in terms of keeping separate communities, we've found that one of the good things about extra care for working age adults is that it can be kind of a home for life sort of thing. It's not like putting them in sort of shared housing, where it's sort of a younger people's model. It's, you know, hopefully it's a good quality home for life, and sort of it's you know, so it's kind of future proofing that, and showing that that you know it is for everyone, and therefore that's how we're configuring those schemes.
And that future proofing, I think, came across in Marcus of the parts of things that you were talking about, and the invisible creations, which I thought looked absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, that's right, Charlotte. And I think, you know, for us, those simple changes can just help people stay longer in their own home, in their own community, without having to move into a more specialist environment or a more segregated environment. So I think it comes back to our corporate plan, as I say, how can we improve the health and well-being? There's lots of things we can do, but some of the simple measures we're taking, but by including it across all of our stock and our development programme, we will get there slowly, if you like, by raising the general standard.
And Dahlia, one of your key words, which I had again, was the holistic approach. Is that very much the way that BPHA look at these things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's key, like I said, not seeing our retirement living population as this kind of homogenous group of people that you can just attach or just make a sort of assumptions as to what their needs are. So absolutely, we have to take a holistic approach. We need to understand that the whole person is coming in. It's not just someone who fits into a particular age bracket, and take in all their needs into consideration, and build a community that encourages that and supports that level of diversity.
Okay, thank you. Some of the questions that were picked up in the Q&A, and Natasha, thank you. You've already answered some of yours, so well done. But extra brownie points there. Lots there about sort of the mix of residents and how individuals got on with each other, and how they actually did live within multi-generational communities. That I'd like to pick up. So one of the other questions that I had was lots of discussion here about resident engagement and making properties suitable for individual residents. How do you go about doing that in practice? And I suppose that leads on to the question that both of our planning people spoke about, which is getting that community engagement, getting people to become involved in future development in local areas. So what were your tactics for that? Marcus, do you want to go first? You're off mute.
Yeah, no, I can do. We have a team, a community investment team that works across our whole geography and proactively promotes community engagement across different tenures as well as different generational needs. We also have a resident consultation panel, which again we have tried to include a mix of ages, experience and tenure types on, so that we're getting a wide view over the services we provide, as well as the home, as well as the physical homes, but the services and how they can help meet the needs of different, as I say, different types of resident. So I think some of it is sort of part push, part pull, if you like, in terms of trying to proactively encourage engagement, but by having that community investment team working alongside our housing officers and our development team, it has proved successful.
And Dahlia, similar at the BPHA side?
Yeah, and I think also another key element is kind of learning from the mistakes, because I think sometimes we don't do that. So it's learning from our mistakes. With, we receive feedback all the time from customers, from communities, and it's about taking that on board when we do the next thing, so that we don't just repeat the same errors, or that we take into consideration suggestions and try to weave them in. So, for example, having a bistro on the top floor is beautiful, got great views, doesn't really support inviting the community in, for example. So there are some things that we can really think about and learn, both from a practical point of view in terms of people's individual flats, but also in terms of how we build that community environment.
Okay, that's an interesting point, actually. One of the questions here in the Q&A relates to effectively value engineering. Maybe we could get our planners involved in an answer to this one. We're all very alert to a developer's value engineering throughout the design and development process. How does the design code look to protect demands and requirements of residents across the cost of providing properties that fit in with what would be the ideal?
Yeah, so I guess the question is, isn't it, how can you stop that thing that we see more often than what we would like, in which you see those beautiful CGIs of a scheme and then something that comes out the other end isn't quite there. Look, I think to be honest, that is more about resourcing within local authorities than it is within design codes. A lot of the things that you will see that are kind of immovable within a planning consent, even after the consent's been granted, and there might be variations to that scheme. The things that are removable are the things in policy terms, such as space standards. I know the reference was to balconies in there. Those types of things shouldn't really be lost if there's a specific standard. So look, it should help to that in an extent, because you would expect when you're in that kind of post-consent section of the process that actually a planner is saying, oh, we can't change this, because it's in the design code. So it should help to an extent, but I think the key is really going to be resourcing. Planning departments in the moment are really struggling to properly resource dealing with planning applications and give the amount of time that's needed to look at these design considerations. So I think it helps, and it gives them the levers, but without the resources and without the number of staff that's required, it is still going to be a little bit trickier to avoid that scenario. Although I would say that's a very small minority of developers that are perhaps looking to do that.
Yeah, and
2 seconds because we're almost on time.
Well, there's a very quick thing, which is that certain authorities are taking a rather hardline view. So, for instance, the LLDC in London is starting to introduce quite onerous design monitoring obligations within its Section 106 agreements, which try to do exactly that, effectively design engineering. But I think there needs to be a careful line trod between ensuring that there's, you know, no unnecessary value engineering going on, and also not bogging down, you know, getting through your REBA stage 3 and 4 drawings and really slowing down delivery. And it's a careful line to tread there, because obviously there's a lot of time invested in getting through the planning process, and then a lot of developers just want to get on because you've got a lot of money, time, sweat and blood tied into the site at that point. So I think, as Jamie says, it's not a widespread issue, and I think it's finding that careful line as to how it can be addressed without going too overboard.
Thank you very much indeed. Jeremy, do you want to wrap up?
Well, on behalf of Charlotte and myself, thanks everybody for a really excellent session. The feedback's been great, and I know people have started to drift after 5:15. But on behalf of both of us, thank you very much. And can I also personally thank Winckworth Sherwood for supporting the LIN and helping to organise this very wide-ranging session. There seems to be a silver thread right throughout, and thanks all the presenters for skillfully bringing those themes out in your presentations, but also answering the excellent questions from the delegates. And as Sally mentioned at the outset, we'll be sharing the recording, the slides and the feedback tomorrow afternoon. And Natasha talked about her forthcoming HousingLIN case study, and we hope that will be out in the next few weeks or so. So do watch out for that. If this is your first session with us, our first happy hour, we hold these weekly and bi-weekly. Our next one actually is next Tuesday, where we're working closely with ASH, the campaign organisation for smoking cessation, following a report that we produced with them for social housing providers. So if you work in social housing and have issues around smoking amongst your tenants and residents and want to learn a bit more about what we've been doing, please do log in for that. And then there was a question earlier about the funding of cash and other issues around the Department of Health. And Carol sort of touched on some of this, but we're being joined by Mark Brown on the 5th of July, who's actually working closely within the Department of Health on looking at that innovation and transformation funding that accompanies the cash fund. So if you want to hear a little bit more about where the Department of Health are taking forward the Adult Social Care White Paper in relation to housing and in technology, do join us on the 5th of July. But as we said right at the outset, we're going to be logging off shortly. You'll be invited to share your feedback for this session. But can I thank Charlotte for excellent chairing, all the speakers for your presentations, the LIN team behind the scenes, and thank you also for listening and watching in today. So rather than wishing you a happy hour drink, I wish you a happy hour ice cream. Enjoy, and look forward to seeing you at the next one. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.